Um, Welcome everyone. My name is Anjum Naweed. I'm a scientific convener at the Congress this year, and in my day job, I'm the cluster lead Human Factors and Operational Readiness at the Appleton Institute for Behavioural Science at CQ University. But the campus is here in Adelaide. That's where I'm calling from. A quick reminder to you all to leave your questions for the presenter in the Q&A box on the right of your screens. Hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end to address them. And I think we will, because we just have the one presentation with us in this session today. And I'm going to invoke my right and my privilege as a chair to introduce Jan myself. And in many ways, I don't think Jan really needs an introduction, but there you go, Jan, I'm sorry. Jan is an innovative leader and visionary with a demonstrable track record as a manager, board director, and chair of the board, consultant researcher, and health education provider. Starting in the field of acute healthcare, intensive care, and perioperative nursing, Jan moved into the newly created role of trauma manager to implement innovative changes to trauma responses institutionally and to represent the area trauma service through the state advisory group reporting to the Department of Health. Jan transitioned into the fields of nursing, medical, and health education to research and implemented high-quality simulation into university curriculum. Her research areas within simulation include clinical reasoning, developing quality simulations, and standard setting. She has represented Simulation Australasia as a chair of the board, a role in which she led the process of restructure of the organisation and committee to re-engage membership, retain, promote and build networks and events, and to initiate standards for simulation within Australasia and represent the company at government level. Quite a CV, Jan. Her interests now reside in exploring the roles, knowledge and skills across sectors using simulation, and with a wonderful cross-section of simulation experts in multiple experts and a 20-plus year role in simulation, Jan hopes to take us on a journey towards the research plan developed for this intrepid task. Her presentation to us today is about identifying common skills and roles across health, defence, engineering, and civil aviation. Take it away, Jan.
That's quite the introduction, Anjum. Thank you very much for that. Having said that, I am probably one of your most nervous speakers, so please excuse my stumbles and ahs and ers, but that's just me. Look, I actually got, and welcome everyone, thank you very much for attending. It's such a tricky way of speaking to people when you're actually looking at a blank screen or just your slides, so, and Anjum's face, so there you go, but we've been doing for a long time now. So what I'm actually talking about today is, wow, I'll start the journey. I started this journey looking at simulation as a profession and looking at it across many different sectors, because in Simulation Australasia, we represent many different sectors. And I thought, what is it that's common to everyone, and we must be a profession. However, what I found is that maybe all is not as it seems. So the research that I'm involved in is, what are those common skills? What are those common roles? And I'm using 4 different areas to review, which are health, defence, engineering and civil aviation. And I am thanking very much my supervision staff, who are incredibly patient with me and wonderful people. So what am I actually trying to do? What I found is that we don't necessarily know what the skills and knowledge are. What we don't necessarily know is what the roles are, and we don't necessarily know whether we can transition between the different groups. So my aim is to explore all of those issues in those 4 different sectors, which is why it's difficult for me with the research question, because as also a pragmatist, I look at people that I know in the industry already transitioning across the roles, and I know in my heart that in my heart of hearts that there's definitely skills, but as a researcher I have to take that step back and say I really don't know. So that's where my mind needs to be at this point in time. So if I continue to take you on the journey, I have done the search strategy, and this is just a very basic mud map, but I'm going to talk to it rather than show it to you like this, because it was an interesting one. I thought, well, we'll do this search strategy, and I'll do the classic comprehensive systematic literature review, and came up with more problems than answers, because what are the main concepts? We use different names, we use different concepts. What do I mean by knowledge and skills, and what do I mean by roles? So it led me to just go to the scoping. Google Scholar, scoping with basic words, looking then into the best papers, going down to the bottom, having a good look at the papers that they'd actually referred to, seeing if there was extras, and through that snowballing process of a couple of levels, able to then say, okay, these seem to be the words that we use most and more, and then running it through the traditional databases. And that was the most helpful system of finding literature. And particularly since I thought I was going to have problems with defence, because I had been told that a lot of the information was classified. However, it seems that there is quite a lot of information across the board. And luckily, through Simulation Australasia, I've probably met a lot of the people that are in simulation that are writing on these areas. And so that's been really quite helpful, because certainly I will be having some conversations. So what does the literature say? I mean, there's two major things that shook out of it for me. I think we heard in the plenary speech with Senator Mullen that we have issues of security, that simulation is something that we're going to have to rely on, and that it's growing quite a lot. And so definitely the literature saying, and in fact over the many sessions I've been to in this conference, it's supporting my view, the simulation workforce is increasing, needs to increase, needs to be trained, needs to know what they're doing. This is something that we must address. However, no one has one list of knowledge and skills. I've always felt in simulation that Simulation Australia's approach of having multiple sectors and industry sectors coming together is always going to be a useful way of organising what we know about simulation and finding some common place. And certainly that is going to be a vehicle, but it was probably surprising that we still don't have knowledge and skills one main list. And I know from the work that I've done on the standards with Peter Ryan that that is to be true. We talk about things, the meaning of literature and modelling. It varies from each of our sectors, and the application of how we actually use simulation and modelling also varies across industries, which is probably a reasonable thing. However, it does have, as I say, workforce implications in workforce shortages. And also, if we don't know what the knowledge and skills are that we would require across sectors, then we don't know what the roles are, then we certainly are not going to know for sure what we need to be able to transition over sectors, and we certainly don't have any kind of esoteric knowledge that would allow us to find some kind of a pathway through to a professional body, which is something that's certainly not within the bounds of this research, but certainly is of interest, I believe, to people, though I may be wrong. So I guess if you have a little look at simulation and the four sectors, and this is just a very, very basic look, the literature's showing me that the most common use of simulation in the sectors that I'm looking at actually varies slightly. And I guess you would expect in healthcare that much of the simulation is focused at that human level, at the experiential level. I've got to look after patients. I have to manage these situations within the patient care situation. So I'm going to be looking at an experience, and I'm going to be looking at how I am going and managing in that experience. Whereas the engineering perspective is often more technical, computer-based, experimental. I want to make sure that bridge doesn't fall over. So that you would tend to see a different use of simulation. Aviation's an interesting area because standards were something, as you know from the Ray page, very important in the very first part of aviation, and they have what is called the no flight simulation, which means that a pilot going into an aeroplane after obviously, you know, their original flying training in small planes can in fact be trained on a large jet without ever flying the plane, and the first flight that they do is a real flight with passengers in the flight. They also, so there's so many hundred hours they have to do in the simulation in order to go onto that flight. They also do use now simulations to test and check both the equipment and also new situations. So it's both experimental and experiential. Defence tends to be a bit of both, which is technical, computers, experiential experience. Excuse me for 1 minute, please. Which tends to be a larger, capture a larger amount of simulation modes and applications. So what I'm really saying is that just like this picture that we're looking of a patient being operated on in a health situation, each of the players in this simulation sees what's happening from a different perspective. They have quite different perspectives of what's going on, which clearly means that depending on how you see things, how you are exposed to things, and what your experiences are, you're going to have a different view, a different perspective, a different way of thinking about what's happening. So it's not surprising with these different sectors that we use simulation differently. And so for this reason, walking in another's shoes is certainly a large part of this research project. In order to be able to understand, I can't look inwards to what I know, and I can't look inwards within one sector. It needs to be multi-sectors, and you know, I can't do 20 sectors, so for what I've chosen. I will say though, interestingly enough, we're not, Australia is certainly has many accredited programs in simulation. And they're all in different sectors because that's the way we work. But if you have a little look at the foreign experience, it's interesting to see that in, say, Florida high school, they're training modelling and simulation from the ground up. And it's obviously linked in with the NASA projects. However, I want to draw attention to the fact that there's a couple of little things here that maybe in our paradigm, we wouldn't even think would be a part of modelling and simulation. Innovation, commercialisation, project management, logistics, ethics, things that perhaps we need to consider if we're going to include the full gamut of how simulation would be utilised and what would be required to be able to transition between the different sectors. I have borrowed another diagram, and I think this is important when we're looking at the difference in sectors again. we don't speak the same language, and that's quite problematic. So this diagram starts to help us to imagine that perhaps we can visualize the language using a couple of figures so that we understand. For example, in a health simulation, if you're using a mannequin and some real people, then it's a whole situation, then you're calling that an immersive simulation. But that's live theatre. It's real people, real equipment with fake bullets, obviously, in the defence. That's live theatre. So it's a different term, kind of meaning the same thing. So this helps us to visualise it in a much more discrete manner to say, okay, we're talking about real or simulated systems, live or simulated people, and that we can also imagine that we can have a situation now with virtual reality and AI where there's going to be a mixture of the two, and that's very important to visualise. This slide has some examples that are very military based, but you can see that I can superimpose a health situation on this slide here that still allows you to think about, well, okay, if we're using real people, we've got real people using a real situation, and we're going to test, or we could use simulated mannequins, blah, 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 blah. So it just gives us an idea or a means of starting to talk the same language so that we can even begin to find those skills and knowledge that's required. Do we have a national approach or an international approach? Look, no, not really. Do we need it? At this point, we have multiple credentialing, and we've also, we don't have anything across industries. And I can't see, certainly not within Australia, but I can't see that this truly exists at this point in time. So again, what is not known? We don't know the roles, and we don't know the full scope of skills that are required for simulation professionals, for the workforce. And again, we do need to find this out in order to be able to identify the gaps. We need to be aware of each other's situation. What am I going to do about it? Okay, my research questions are 4. The first one speaks to the roles. The second one speaks to the roles and knowledge that are required to carry out those, sorry, the knowledge and skills required to carry out those roles and across the 4 industries. And then, what are those knowledge and skills that are common across the sectors? And lastly, potential transferable roles. So they're the main research questions. The methodology is intended to be a means of discovering what's already out there and written or online, and the second part is through focus groups to identify what's going on, those common themes, those recurrent themes, and areas of contention. So this is a very busy slide, but what I'm showing you here is that the first 3 questions, there's crossover in the design, is part 1, and this is the document search, the desktop search, which is truly looking to the roles and the knowledge and skills within the sector, and seeing if there's some common roles. So through a document search, that's what I hope to find out. Now, the size of the population, I'm really looking at a 4-week period, a 4-week window, and if I find, which will be, which is time-based to randomise this, if I find that over the 4-week period that nothing kicks out, and that may be an issue, I don't know, then I will have to review that and expand that amount of time. And it will be in grey literature and online, and the major areas that I'll be looking through will be through the peak bodies, literature, on roles, knowledge and skills, and on job recruitment sites to get some kind of feel. And from that, I'm hoping to be able to use a systematic analysis to map the key themes and concepts that I find from that desktop review. I acknowledge that there will be problems, not to mention that the descriptions may not match what the roles entail. Maybe the knowledge and skills in recruitment sites will have been written by people that aren't really sure about what's required, in which case that could be an issue, and that the advertising avenues might be difficult to find for simulation and modelling personnel, and it might be very difficult. I'm just going to correct this, but basically we've had a very funny period at the moment with COVID, and so there may be some limitations there. I'll just put it in a very brief form here. From there, from the mapping, I will be moving on to section 2, which is focus groups. And you might ask, why are you not doing a Delphi? Why not do an NGT? Because I don't want consensus. What I actually require is an exploratory research. I need to know what's happening out there, and I don't need consensus for that. I need to find out the full breadth and width of what is going on. So that's why I'm using focus groups. What I'm looking at is groups of up to 8 people, and I'm not quite sure how many groups I will need to run, but I'm looking at possibly 4 as in the first place. And I'm looking at the workforce sectors having 2 representatives from each workforce sector to make a total of up to 8 in each focus group. Running a pilot in the first place so that I can test the system and make sure that I'm happy. I want to be able to send out the map from the desktop survey to those focus group personnel for their review and comments first. Then, based on their feedback, I would like to make sure that the questions that the open-ended questions that I have prepared will be relevant and realistic. And then we'll go into the groups. Like any good focus group, I am using a moderator to help keep everything on track and to document any thoughts and ideas that I maybe don't capture as well as recording, the usual thing that you would expect. I'm sorry, I just will move on. So that's it there, very basic format. Probably that's the one I should have shown in the first place. Potential impact. The potential impact of my research will be, I believe, we will know at the end, is there any workforce transferability? Is it possible because of the finding of the roles and knowledge and skills? And also, I believe that there will be a pathway, though it's outside of the scope of this work, towards looking at whether there is a sector-wide profession and professional approach. And I can't say that at this point because clearly, without knowing what the knowledge and skills are and the roles are, we have no means of predicting what that profession might look like and have shape. I also believe that this work will have significant impact on how we teach and the content of our teaching in the simulation world. So I'm very excited with it, and I hope to be able to work and talk with many of you with this topic. I'm just going to take a pause for a second. If you would like to be a part of what's going on, if you pick up your phone and take a photo of this QR code, and oh my goodness, in Australia, we are all very familiar with QR codes now. If you could take a photo, it will bring you to my Padlet. The Padlet has instructions on how to add comments. It's kind of like a notice board of people that haven't used this before. And what I'm looking at is this is just helpful for me, for the people that happen to be here on this session at the moment. If you would like to write what the roles in simulation that you know of are, you know, technician, educator, whatever they may be, what you know of. And if you could then write perhaps what knowledge and skills you think are required for a person working within the simulation workforce. Now, I think this is going to be really interesting because I truly believe that what somebody from engineering says and what somebody from health says, or defence or aviation, are going to be quite different. And so for that reason, when you make a comment on my Padlet, please put your name in and in the sector that you're with, and maybe even your own role, so that it just gives me some kind of perspective. And if you're interested in being a part of the focus groups that I will be running next year, I would love you to just say, yes, I'm interested in being involved, and I'd love to hear from you in the contact on the Hoover, so that I could actually make sure that I include you in my focus groups. So, in summary, by the time my thesis is completed and published, I hope that we have those roles, knowledge and skills that are required in a simulated workforce in total clarified. And then I hope that we can identify what are the commonalities across sectors, because from this work, I believe that we will be assisting our workforce shortages, and we'll be moving a little bit closer towards looking at what that transferability between areas and what constitutes a profession in simulation, if there is one. So I'm not going to go on to these slides. It's going the wrong way, and now I've lost I can't go back. I won't go back. So I'm going to leave it there at this point. Oh my goodness. At this point, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you fine, Jan.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. I just lost everybody for a second. So I just wanted to make sure that I could hear you and that you could hear me. So I don't even know how long I've taken, Anjum.
That's all right. You've taken a bit longer than others have in sessions, but that's okay, because this was essentially your session. If that's all right, I might start asking some questions if you think that you might have finished.
Please do, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. I thought that it was really interesting, and it was also quite nice to sort of see a good rundown, really, of your research and what you're planning on doing, and you know what you see as the vision at the end. It was good to sort of see where your thoughts are going, and what you've kind of been, what areas you've been dancing around, and also the underlying rationale for it. There aren't a huge amount of questions coming in on the system here, but please do ask some questions if you have any. There's an observation that Susanna's made, Susanna Whitney. She said, great talk. Simulation within defense is a very broad and heterogeneous field, including health, engineering, aviation, etc. So she knows of defense medical sim involving moulage and mannequins, defense aviation simulators for training, etc. There's definitely crossover with the other 3 domains you listed. So she talked about, that was her observation there. I had a question for you. I don't know if you wanted to make a comment on Susanna's observation.
Interesting, as Susanna, actually, I did pose a question on the Hoover site about what a profession was and whether we were part of it, and she actually mentioned on that session that it seemed very broad and a bit like fixed, like Mercury were going to be very difficult to hold on to. I think that's what she's alluding to, and yes, it is a very broad area. And it's going to be quite difficult, I think, to find the commonalities. But I guess I'm at the point in my life, Susanna, where I guess I can be completely proven wrong, or I can be, maybe find something that's very significant to our area that is worthwhile. So,
I think that whatever you end up doing, I think you will definitely push the field forward, because with your research questions and the way that you've laid them out, I can't really envisage a scenario where you don't lead, to producing some really important knowledge that moves things forward with, rather large potential for impact there. So, I think that when you're trying to put together search terms for systematic reviews and getting everything out, it's a case of just distilling it down to as much as you can. But I have a question in relation to that. With the slide that you had with the 4 sectors, I wanted to know what your thoughts were on what the best or worst trade-off in the study types across the 4 sectors was. So is it that there's not enough experimental/technical studies in healthcare? Or is it that there's not enough experience-based studies in engineering?
Look, I guess what I'm thinking is that it's. I think that it's that probably it's not a trade-off. I think the problem is that we've got a very each of the sectors at this point have had a very narrow view of what they're most interested in, and they've focused on the things that are most important to them at this point. And because of that, others in their areas haven't been encouraged or able to go more into to the areas that perhaps that they haven't been involved in. So I guess I think we've done a value add with the research. And I guess if I think about the engineering, when I said, we just want to make sure the bridge actually stands. But if we then go back to the experiential side of the bridge, have you remembered to make the walkway across the bridge wide enough and safe enough so that people can actually go across? And can you get a bicycle across as well? So these human factor things that aren't necessarily considered in the engineering front, because it works. We don't need to go any further. And as I said, in healthcare, and it's only quite relatively new, very much on that experience side, but not necessarily thinking about that engineering aspect, which in hospitals just recently, millions of dollars have been saved in the Queensland hospitals by using those experiences and that experimental side to look at how effective what is being designed is going to be for the people that actually have to use it. So it's a blend of that experience and experience. So what I think will shake out is that possibly we're being too narrow. And for that reason, we need to make sure that our skills and knowledge are clean enough to be able to understand. No one's going to know everything, but at least if we understand what's possible across our sectors, then we can draw in the correct knowledge and requisite skills to come together to make a complete picture in simulation.
Okay. Belinda says, well done, Jan, sounds fabulous. And she wonders whether another potential impact for your work appears to be a greater understanding about cross-disciplinary competencies. which may then support resource sharing and collaborations?
Thanks, Glenn. Yes, I totally agree that will eventually be a part of it. But I think in the very first instance, and I think that works towards credentialing and professionalism. But what I was surprised at is that before you can actually get to professionalism, before you can get to full-on cross-sector credentialing, you need to know what those knowledge and skills are. You need to know what the roles are. And so that's a large project. So rather than making this research 2 lifetimes, I've actually had to condense it down to 1 lifetime. And I believe that what I will be providing for the next researchers is the next kickoff to do exactly what you're saying, Glenda. So if you want to go on that one after me, go right in.
I've got lots of lingering questions about how you will manage to fit in this into your life, because it sounds like it's going to be really, really demanding. And I'm sure out of anybody, you've probably got the executive level management skills needed and organization skills to pull it off. I did have a couple more questions though, and I thought I might ask you that. So you made an observation about how we don't really have a national approach. Or an international approach, let alone a national one. Why do you think that is? I mean, what is it about the field, and what is it about this area that is prohibiting that sort of thing?
Well, I think for a start, it's one of those areas that's across many sectors. That's the first thing. But I think even within our sector, we still consider simulation sits here, and then there's the rest of the sector, and so it's a subset of every sector, and so I think that always makes it difficult, and it also makes it difficult for us to be able to gain the recognition and the cash, let's face it, to be able to join forces and make it possible to create this national approach. Though I have to say I found it very heartening to hear Senator Molan talking about we need a national approach. So if we need a national approach, then we actually need to know what our skills and knowledge are across our sectors. So I found that quite heartening.
Okay. And if there are any more questions, keep them coming in. I do have more. Sorry to keep throwing questions in your direction here. When I was looking at your slides that were laying out the methodology and what you plan on doing, and how you want to do it, and the way that you've sort of stepped it out, it felt like to me that you have the makings of research that's really primed for theory formulation. Like, given that there's so many gaps, and we're talking about bridging between different sectors, I'm sure there's lots of stuff that's been done out there already. But have you considered maybe using something like grounded theory rather than conventional thematic analysis to,
Absolutely, I definitely have, and it may end up being that that's exactly what I how it ends up being. And you can imagine as I'm talking to you about this, we've talked about thematical analysis, we've talked about grounded theory, and we've talked about how it will hang together. I mean, you're dead right, and I'd love to talk to you about that more, Anjum, after this, so that perhaps you can throw out your thoughts and feelings on that, because it's certainly there's different ways of approaching this study.
Okay, and then in terms of the Florida experience, I thought that was quite fascinating and quite telling. Do you have any thoughts or ideas around why they've done it that way, and why it is that it sort of is such a unique thing? I mean, are there any cultural dimensions at play in the way they think about simulation? Is it just because of where they are geographically and the links with, NASA and, the rhetoric around simulation over there? What makes it so unique?
I absolutely think that's what happened, Anjum. I think it's literally they had workforce issues and they needed to train them. When you think about some of the amazing examples of simulation with people in space simulating near disasters on the ground, they were paying for very high stakes, billions of dollars. So this is a very serious topic for that state, and it having been to the area. I know that that many of the people are employed into the area or affiliated to the area, so this is their high school. This is where they're going to get jobs. This is how they're going to get employment, and so I think this is what's happened. And you know, I just look at this and think, wow, it's incredible. This is school kids learning this.
Do you think that there might be something similar happening here? I mean, just thinking back to the almost call to arms that we heard yesterday in terms of where we are and the emerging vulnerabilities that we have from a military perspective. Do you think that we might see something here as well, like this?
I really do. I know that there's been the STEM and branch push for kids, but I truly, now this is just a personal belief, so please, you know, don't take this as a research-driven answer. But for me, when I look at certainly not just the Florida experience, but a number of ways that the education in America goes, there is this more inclusive and rounded way that seems to be pushed, which includes not just being able to do the job at arms, but also to be able to project manage it, to be able to consider how you're going to financially. And I do think for us, it's not enough for us to just be in the STEM and scientific endeavours. We also need to have that full understanding that without being able to convince people and get cashed up, we can't do anything. So I do think that it's going to be an approach, a national approach. And I think from simulation, we're actually in a great position to be able to perhaps simulate that approach.
Fabulous. Well, I have no more questions for you. There's nothing else that's come in there. Hopefully you get lots of responses on your QR code applet thing that you sent out. I've had a look at it and it looks very good. I might jump in there myself. So with that, I'll thank you, Jan. This is the end of your session. We're going to be taking a break now. And after the break from 3 p.m. Australian Eastern AEDT, we're going to continue with abstract presentations in track 1 and track 2. If you're registered for a masterclass with Jawahar Bala, JB, known to those in the community as well, please join us at 2:15 p.m. same time zone. Thanks everyone for joining the session, and thanks Jan for your talk.
Thank you, Anjum, and thank you everyone for turning up. I appreciate your time.
Thanks everyone. Bye.